So right now, for the next 45, 50 minutes or so, I'm going to introduce Brian Anderson, who is going to introduce Johnny Curry and Judy McGill for some really interesting conversations, keeping on going on stuff that matters. Don't forget that you can, at different times, put up your hand and say, excuse me, could you explain that, and so forth. But for now, are you ready for round two? Half of you, brilliant. Keep the other half with you. This is Brian Anderson. Show him some love.
Can that go away? Can that go away, no?
Do you want it to? Do you want to plug it in, or just keep this thing in?
Just put it out of the way. All right. Are we all good? You sure? Good, okay. Well, I know it's always great to see an old man of my age in front of you, but hopefully we'll not bore you too much. I'm the minister in this complex that you're in this morning. This is a Methodist centre. It used to be a Methodist church, but now it's converted into a place where conversations like this can happen. It's called Skainos, which is an old-fashioned word for tent. So when you walk out there and you see all those poles at an odd shape and you think the architect must have had a bad drunk day when he was putting those up or designing those, it's to reflect the fact that most tent poles are at an angle. And we are here to provide a space for people to discuss things. And this is such an event. So we're delighted to host the Good Summit around it. I'm no expert, so we've got a team of people who are a little bit more expert than I am on the whole issue of paramilitarism and poverty. And we're going to think around what it means to be in a community where paramilitarism plays out. And does that affect the cost of living crisis? And does that affect the communities in which paramilitaries do still have a play and play out? So I'm delighted to welcome Inspector Gabrielle Savage from the Neighbourhood Police here in East Belfast. So Gabrielle, if you'd be happy, am I okay calling you Gabrielle? Oh, that's good. That's good. And then we have Judy from Resolve. And Resolve is a restorative justice project. And then, now, this man yesterday was at 10 Downing Street, but he's decided that this was equally as important. Mr. Johnny Curry, who is the one of the, what's your title, Johnny, in Trussell Trust?
Wasn't at 10 Downing Street, I was just in the House of Parliament.
Oh, sorry. Just the Houses of Parliament.
Yeah.
As you do.
Northern Ireland lead for the Trussell Trust.
Thank you. Northern Ireland lead for the Trussell Trust. Just very briefly, in a few seconds, tell us the job you do in relation to paramilitaries. Gabrielle.
Gabby's absolutely fine. I'm looking around here at all the faces and wondering how much TV that you're tuning into these days. I'm at the forefront of policing action with regards to paramilitarism with different levels within the police service. Proactively, we have detectives who will do proactive operations against paramilitaries. And then I'm at the softer end of things with the neighbourhood policing. We're in uniform, but we are looking at paramilitarism and the effects in the community. We're talking to people and feeding information into a big system where we're able to target the right people. And that basically means putting them through the criminal justice system.
Judy?
Yep. So my name's Judy McGill. So I work for Resolve, which is a community-based restorative justice project. So I've been working there for the past 6 years. I suppose I am slightly different to Gabrielle in terms of we would actively try and stop people from getting into the criminal justice system, even coming close to criminal behaviour. So we would use restorative practice, restorative justice to try and eradicate some of the issues that's going on in communities, which unfortunately still includes paramilitaries and kind of coercive control and that informal methods of justice that's still going on in communities where I suppose communities would contact still paramilitary groups rather than the police to sort out problems that they would deem problems that are happening in the communities at that time. Alongside that, I'm also a researcher and lecturer at Ulster University in criminology, so I teach undergrad students, and again that's all around restorative justice, crime and criminal justice, that side of things.
Johnny, I know your Trussell Trust is a network of food banks, but just very briefly, in the communities where poverty is playing itself out, do you see or hear, or is there a testimony to the impact that paramilitarism has on those who are struggling to put food on the table?
Yes, we support just over 50 food banks across Northern Ireland, providing emergency food in all sorts of neighbourhoods, but particularly areas of high deprivation. And if for a lot of those areas, if you were to put a map of where the most intense paramilitary activity is, it's largely in areas where our food banks are busiest. So our food banks do see instances of intimidation, of coercion and control, and of, I guess, issues around debt as well that are driving people to food banks because their money ends up having to be given to other people.
So what I hope we will explore today is trying to get an understanding of what paramilitarism looks like 25 years after the Good Friday Agreement. What does justice look like? How do we help groups transition? And lastly, what is the impact on those communities that are struggling with poverty and how they find their way out of it? So that's kind of the fourth areas we're going to look at over the next short period of time. What I would like you to do is get your piece of paper, get your friends or your new friends, and have a conversation around, define a paramilitary group. Give us a definition of a paramilitary group as you understand it. Okay, can anybody like to begin feeding back to us what your thoughts are around a paramilitary group, or how would you define them? Anybody want to go first? Yeah. You'll need to shout out. Sorry. So they're trying to defend, as a group of people, defend a cause. And that's usually a cause around the identity of the definition of their country. Yeah, okay, thank you. They're violent and they use intimidation to enforce their rules. You want to say any more about rules on that one? When you say rules, what do you think? What's in your thoughts? What's in your mind? Yes. Thank you. Really good. Really, really helpful. Okay, so their hold tends to be in more, forgive this term, working class areas. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, so this chap here is putting some up-to-date thoughts around it, in that maybe they started with a cause about national identity. They created fear, picking up this gentleman's point, but you're saying over the 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement, their identity has changed and they've become more involved with criminality, and that criminality isn't always linked to the cause. Okay. Great, really helpful stuff. Yep. Yes, so you're backing up your friend up here's point that it's more about criminality and money making than it is about the cause. Yeah. Gabrielle, you've heard what the young people have said. Would you concur with their points of view?
Yes, lots of head nodding from me there. Historically you'll learn about terrorism and paramilitary organisations in your history classes, from the Provisional IRA and our history in Ireland through to the loyalist groupings forming in Northern Ireland to defend Ulster and Northern Ireland. And that has changed significantly from the very early days through to where we are now. A paramilitary organisation is obviously one that will inflict a terrorist cause to get a gain in some description, and that will be primarily on the government. Some of them believe that their cause is legitimate. People look at it romantically, potentially. However, in today's current climate, what we have, how do people end up in paramilitary organisations? Well, you either volunteer or you are forced into it, coerced, or pressured. People will join a paramilitary organisation potentially because it's something that their dad did, other members of their family, or they will be in fear and they will join because they owe money. They're being forced to do it for somebody else. They've fallen into the wrong group of people. But yes, essentially whenever a person ends up in a paramilitary organisation, they'll carry out various functions, lots of different levels. It's an organisation, you could laugh, like the police or the army, they have tiers of responsibility, and who is in charge, down in a triangle shape, down to the grassroots level, and that can be from the most serious organising a plot and serious offences, right down to any number of people who are carrying out small tasks in order to create fear in the community. Drugs is a very good example, and would be the biggest policing issue that we have with regards to organised criminal activity. And with regards to yourself saying organised crime gangs in Ireland, yes, primarily they're connected to paramilitarism. And the only examples that I can think of that aren't would be Eastern Europeans and people who are coming in with a different agenda, or drugs that are being used like cannabis and connected to other, again, it would be persons within a certain community, Asian community, etc., would be known to be connected to cannabis use. So yes, all your points are spot on.
Mm-hmm. Good. And over the 25 years, has the trend been away from the cause towards the criminality in the police's experience?
Well, policing's not about causes. The media will report on why these people might be doing it, and from the outside looking in, you'll understand the sides that they fall into. Policing, just say, for example, 25 years ago, yes, we would have been focusing on paramilitarism for murders, bombings, very serious incidents. And over time, with people assisting the police who have carried out research, criminologists, social experts, understanding that paramilitarism is not just the big boys at the top of the hierarchy giving out the commands. It's about the larger collective impact that it has in the communities, and the diverse range of crimes that paramilitarism will touch, and the focus that police should have in all those areas in order to keep people safe. In my role in neighbourhood, that's what we focus on, drug dealing, people being in fear of violence, and fear in the community of certain individuals doing something, and that could be even just a child's education and curfews, which still exist, because somebody in the community is deemed to have the important role of potentially giving out justice in an alternative fashion, not the police, restorative justice groups. And there's various different mechanisms in Northern Ireland of ways for people to transmit that fear, not necessarily in the name of a paramilitary organisation. So it's multifaceted.
So why doesn't society just say, get off stage, go away, leave us alone? Why just do we not, we're 25 years after the Good Friday Agreement, there's another fresh start of storm hopefully coming. Why do communities not just say, get off our backs? Judy, anything you want to say about that?
I suppose, even from a researcher's point of view, that is the question. I think there is a lot of debate going on. Whenever it was passed the Good Friday Agreement, they were supposed to be defenders of their community. there's a debate going on, what are they defending now whenever they are still, in some areas operating really serious, suppose criminal enterprises in terms of drugs and all the kind of issues that go along with that. The illegal money lending stuff has been a big issue, and it's been on the rise recently, not so much even in terms of cases, and Gabrielle might be able to speak better on that, but in terms of people are actually talking about it more, and I think that's because of the cost of living crisis. People are desperate, and so then more people are even actively going to paramilitary groups for that extra money. But again, that all comes at a price, so they may get lent money and then interest gets added on, or young people may have to do something to pay that money back that they don't have, which may be that they start selling drugs for that paramilitary group, and all the stuff that comes along with that, and then suddenly they're in a paramilitary group. So there's lots of reasons why young people may be still coerced into paramilitary groups. The research would suggest it's about especially when you're talking about working class areas, it's about those areas of deprivation that maybe have, I suppose, less stuff to do. So there isn't the youth clubs, there isn't that family support, there's not those social bonds. So they feel that there's maybe this like invisible glass ceiling in those communities, and they feel lost, they feel alone. And although it's hard to understand, those paramilitary groups are still a social bond to them. So they become part of their identity, and then those behaviours become normalised.
Okay, Johnny, in the food banks that you're in touch with, where people are coming because they can't afford the essentials, does paramilitarism pop up in the reasons why people are at the food bank?
Yeah, so food bank that we work with in our network has set up a baby bank, which is a way for young parents to access items they need for their newborn child. And we hear quite powerfully direct accounts that the reason why folks are referred to the baby bank is because of money that they would have been able to spend on that they've had to owe to paramilitary lenders. I live in Arden, North Down, and I sit on the Policing and Community Safety Partnership there as an independent member. And since last March, we've had a very public paramilitary feud in the area, which has been a huge drain on police resources. And the thing that we always talk about around that table is, what do you call this? Is it a drug feud by rival crime gangs? And some people around the table very clearly believe that it is, and that's the language that they use. But there's others who acknowledge that there's a really strong collective and contested memory that's associated with paramilitary groupings around a cause and a sense of safety and security that's still there. And something as well that I think complicates it further, which is another conversation, is historical links to political power and influence as well, which are probably still in the mix in terms of paramilitary groups and their influence.
Is there a difference between nationalist areas and Protestant areas, Gabrielle?
A difference with
in terms of the
regards-
impact upon communities?
No. And at the end of the day, we're all human. The great Protestant Catholic thing, you may have grown up in a certain community, you may have gone to your big school and asked the question of your parents, well, what am I? Am I Protestant or Catholic? Depending on your church attending. Young people today don't seem to focus on this divide as much as we would have done whenever I was growing up. You knew what side you were on. And it's not about sides, it's about power. The people who are involved in paramilitarism in each of those two communities display exactly the same characteristics. They want to bully people, they want to be in charge, they want to have power, and it's for their agenda, be it to be in control of something or to be making money from drugs. And the outcomes of that are the same on each community. The harm that's done, people falling into debt, having drug addictions, misguided as to carrying out criminality in the cause of one faction or another. And And I would say that you could compare that to any kind of terrorism in other ethnic communities across in England. It would be exactly the same thing, but the destruction within those communities is comparable, and people losing faith in their society, their community, money, their health. It's destructive in either.
So they play out in equal measure, so to speak, across Northern Ireland?
Yes. You could have said that one particular paramilitary group was more powerful than another in Northern Ireland at one time because of the amount of people who were potentially connected to the IRA. That's because loyalism was more split within various different paramilitary groups. So the impact that the IRA had over the Troubles was more significant. But collectively, whenever you look at all the loyalist crimes that were committed by them collectively, you're looking at a balancing bar as to, a lot of harm being caused by both sides, but no.
Okay, yeah. I'd like you now to get round your table again and discuss the question of what is justice? Communities that are affected by paramilitary groups, what does justice look like? How do we as a society decide how to deal with those who would call themselves paramilitaries, who are doing wrong? What does justice look like? All right, just for 2 minutes.
I suppose for me, I am kind of on the fence on this, just because I agree with the whole, they've had 25 years to transition. I personally think that they should have transitioned by now. And that mainly is because what we've been talking about today in terms of, are they still paramilitaries? Are they criminal gangs? If that is the case, that it is all about power and money, like you were saying, then surely they should be able to cease. If they are just a gang now, then where is that paramilitary that? And if they are still paramilitaries and it is about that political, that religious cause, then where do we go from here? The only thing I would say is that I agree with what you were saying as well in terms of to achieve that long-term change that you were saying about, the way to do that is not by criminalising people further. And what you're touching on there is actually known as like that self-fulfilling prophecy, as in if they see that there's no way out, they're criminalised, they're going to have barriers in terms of employment, in terms of travel. They see no way out, then that actually leads to further crime. So that's why I'm kind of on the fence on that.
Okay, Gabrielle, anything you want to add around that, or?
Well, from a policing perspective, we look at suspects who come before us with a lens that background, motive. Why have they done this? It's not just about the circumstances of the case that you have to deal with at the time. It's also dealing with the people that you have in front of you as an individual. We regularly deal with suspects who, like the injured parties that we deal with, have vulnerabilities. So with regards to paramilitarism, you'll see recently going through the courts individuals who their background has been taken into consideration with the sentencing by the judge. In Laganside Crown Court there recently, we've had drug dealers in East Belfast. We've done our job. We've arrested, interviewed, put them before the court, said this is the evidence, this is what we found. The judge has looked at it, they've been convicted, but the circumstances around that have been taken into consideration, and we would also do that whenever we're investigating any kind of incident or case. What's the background of this person? Why have they done it? Are they vulnerable? Have they been taken advantage of? And quite frequently with individuals who have been involved in paramilitarism, yes, they have been vulnerable and they've been taken advantage of. They still have to go through the criminal justice system because they've committed a crime with various different levels for doing that. You might not end up in court, but the individual who's involved is taken into consideration, and that was quite clearly shown there with the judge's ruling for drug dealers in East Belfast. They were almost forced into this. They had no other opportunity to get away from the fear of paramilitaries in their community holding them to ransom. And that might sound like something difficult for you to comprehend, but the reality of it is brutal in that these paramilitaries will really cause serious harm, and it might not just be financial and fear within that family. It quite often results in physical violence. You'll have heard of paramilitary style assaults, arranged shootings, and beatings.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to say anything else about the justice side of things and how we as a society deal with paramilitarism in our communities? So I don't think we've fallen in any particular way, but at least you've heard the views around it. I'm conscious that we have rural and urban schools here. If you're happy just as an open forum, those who would live in a more rural setting, does paramilitarism play out in your lives? There's one guy saying no there. Yeah. Not really? Yeah. Uh-huh. Right, okay, thank you. Those in a more urban setting, live in a town or a city, have you any, do you sense it more? This chap's nodding.
See, much more often, rather than girls being like to see outside, whether big flags being thrown up, and even people you know actually walking around in groups or have family in groups. You notice it a lot more, and there is a culture of silence where even if you know or witness or hear of criminal acts happening, you don't speak out it, and the fear of being ostracized or fear of attacks against you. There was a guy in the Virgin of Gavin, and he was followed in it. Someone took actually knows what happened to him, but he died, and now his family houses, they're all the windows are boarded up with metal for fear of petrol bombs being thrown through, and stuff like that. That's on the main road.
Okay. So the consequences of living out, just living in the community, you see things that are happening and it makes your awareness greater then? Okay. Anybody else? This urban, rural impact? Again, that borne out, Gabrielle?
Yeah, before I came here, I had a look at the map of Northern Ireland and some analytical product that we had with regards to where our paramilitary assaults and incidents are occurring. It's all across Northern Ireland, but it will predominantly be in urban areas: Belfast, Derry, Lurgan, Ards. Yes, you can see it more visually as you're driving through certain areas, and this is what ties into the poverty out in rural areas. Yes, you might have families that are struggling, but the reach isn't there from the paramilitary organisation. They're not living next door or the road behind. It's a whole different map out in the countryside. There have been traditional areas down in Mid-Ulster, South Armagh, where there has been considerable hold on communities from paramilitaries. But you'll not feel that as much as what you will in a built-up area, because it's not your mate or somebody in your class. It's just, it's not as focused.
Okay. Can we think a little bit now around poverty and the cost of living crisis that many families are living through? Johnny, the food banks and the network, hit us with some stats about the impact of poverty in Northern Ireland.
Sure. So we launched some research earlier in the year called Hunger in Northern Ireland, which looked at what's the scale of food bank use here. So roughly 16% of the Northern Ireland population have experienced something called food insecurity, which means that they've had to make really, really intentional decisions around meal sizes, how many meals to have, how much money to spend, whether to skip meals entirely, either for them or for the rest of their family. So that's about 354,000 people here, a population of around the size of Belfast. So that's people who are at risk of food poverty. almost a quarter of people referred to our food banks have someone in the household who's at work. So there's really no typical food bank user anymore. There's a wide range of people who are having to rely on emergency food. And the last thing I'll share is that food bank use in Northern Ireland is rising at a much higher rate than any other region of the UK. And it's risen about 170% since before the pandemic.
For 2 minutes, write on your page, what's the causes of poverty in Northern Ireland, in your judgment? What's the causes of poverty? Okay, I'm just conscious of time moving along. Johnny, can I ask, is there a typical household or person in poverty? Is it, how do you, what does it look like? Is it a homeless person is poor? Is there other families that are poor? How do you define poverty in terms of people and social groupings?
Yeah, we would define poverty from a food bank perspective as someone or a household who can't afford the essentials. Around 75% of people referred to our food banks would be destitute, which is another term to throw out there, which means that people have to make really, really difficult decisions around whether to feed their family or to heat their home. So while there are a range of definitions out there of poverty from an emergency food perspective, for us it's about people that can't afford the essentials to live a dignified life, to feed their family and heat their home. As I said earlier, there's no typical food bank user though, and that is true. Most people coming to our food banks are in receipt of some sort of social security payment, but almost 1 in 4 here have someone in work. But in the first 6 months of last financial year, we had 10,000 people who had never accessed emergency food in their lives before. So more and more people are having to use a food bank
in
for the
Northern
first time.
Ireland?
That's in Northern Ireland, yeah.
10,000 more people went into a food bank last year?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And there's an emerging group of people at our food banks who really, some sort of emergency food parcel is only one of a range of things that they need. We have more and more people coming to food banks who are falling through the cracks of failing public services, where they need much more support than a food bank, but a food bank referral is pretty much all that's left.
And your Essentials campaign, in terms of the social security system, basically you say there's not enough money in people's pockets and it needs to be increased?
Yeah, so the basic social security payment is around £85 a week, which was arrived at by the Westminster government in a very arbitrary basis. We believe it doesn't really reflect the cost of a week's essentials and your utilities and all of that. So we've worked with Joseph Rowntree Foundation, who are an anti-poverty charity across the UK, and we've recalculated that for it really to be £125 a week to more accurately reflect a cost of shopping, clothes, utilities for a household. That's one of our asks that we think would make a huge impact on reducing the need for food banks, because we don't want to have to exist.
So building on what Johnny just said, what's your thoughts around what causes poverty in Northern Ireland? Yeah. Any from these tables over here? We haven't heard too much from these tables over here. I'm not missing you, don't worry. So the cost of actual living, the essentials rising, yes. Thank you, that's good. Yes. The recession, yeah. We're living in hard times, yes, yep. Yes, so the lack of stable, consistent government in Northern Ireland, I think you're right, yes. the stigma can last for a time. We would top up people's gas and electricity cards here. We have a food bank here, and it's constant, and it's over a 3-month period, maybe slightly longer. The number of people who are coming back because the social security system isn't secure enough to give them enough they need. So it's definitely an issue of how do we stop this long term. Yeah, good. Anybody else? Yeah.
Income inequality, especially in Ireland compared to the rest of the UK.
Yeah, the gap between those who are earning a decent wage and those who are left with not enough money to pay for the essentials. So that's a factor, yes. Any of those resonate with you, Johnny, as we sort of bring this wee section to close?
Certainly. I mean, something that I think brings the two strands of paramilitary coercion and control and food bank use together is that there's undoubtedly broad agreement out there that we want a Northern Ireland without food banks. We also want a Northern Ireland without paramilitary coercion and control. That's where I think there's huge common ground in this place. But what we need, I think, and maybe this is a question for this afternoon when I'll not be here, is the political will to address both of those things, because it's hard to imagine a Northern Ireland without paramilitaries, and it's hard to imagine a Northern Ireland without food banks, and we need to get beyond that.
It's really good. That's a lovely phrase. Okay, we're sort of rounding this wee session up. Any takeaways that you have, or any comments you'd like to make to those who contributed? Has it broadened your understanding of paramilitarism, confirmed it? What have you heard over the last 45 minutes? Yeah, maybe we'll give you a couple of seconds just to maybe form your thoughts. Any feedback for the three folks who gave of their time for you? Yeah. Good, thank you. Yes? Yeah, thank you. Yes?
Until you have stable governance, and no governance, and what was like in the last 7 years, until you have stable governance, you can't get the executive then to start bringing strategies or implement strategies that are already there. And until that sort of happens and we get some stability, we're not going to be able to tackle paramilitarism, we're not going to be able to tackle poverty.
Yeah.
I'm not saying the assembly can't see it forever.
No, I know you're not. Yeah. And there's an anti-poverty strategy sitting on the shelf, isn't there?
It's just in response to that point very quickly. While an assembly can't solve everything, food bank use, while it's up across all the regions of the UK, the smallest increases are in Scotland. And there's a strong argument that that's because the Scottish Parliament is making full use of its devolved powers to put more measures in place to put more money into people's pockets.
Yeah. Scotland is a good model to look at to see how they have adapted and formalised things so that poverty doesn't have the same impact on the community as it has in other ones. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Any last comment just on that last comment from Judy or Gabrielle?
Yeah, I see that as being two-tiered. There's obviously enforcement through law and enforcement agencies with regards to taking out the key players. We could go into the difficulties in that they hide behind smaller people, and it's difficult to evidentially prove what they're doing. But on a bigger picture, the coercive control within the communities, the police we can't solve all those problems, and it requires multi-agencies to be able to have people coming forward with information to break down that fear in the communities, and giving people options that it might not be resolved by the police. There are other agencies where we can put in place mediation, interventions, restorative projects, and it's about removing the motivation. The motivation currently being control, power, wealth through criminal activities. In Northern Ireland we have a difficulty with the criminal justice system and sentencing, but these are things, again, government being back in Stormont will be able to assist with, that when we do target the right people, that they're getting the proper sentencing to keep them away from carrying on with their criminality in the community. But it's a collective effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Judy, you want to add to
Yeah,
that?
I think I completely agree with Gabby on that. I think it's definitely, there's a policing role in there. At the minute, unfortunately, paramilitaries are still filling a gap in society, especially here, that has a lot of issues going on. So there needs to be something else that fills that gap. And in terms of, young people, usually like 16, 17, 18, it's about getting involved in things that are filling that gap for you. In terms of youth clubs, in terms of good social bonds, good friends, good family support. Not saying that, all these criminological theories are great, but they're very general. It doesn't mean that everyone that lives in a working class area is going to be involved in crime. Absolutely not. That's not what I'm trying to say. But there are definitely things that that can support you in terms of and just thinking about criminal records and what would be called the collateral consequences of crime. As you go forward into university, apprenticeships, getting jobs, things like that, it all does have an effect. So not to scare you leaving you with that, but just to make sure you have that support in your communities and to stop you thinking about other choices, other paths.
Can I add just positively on the youth clubs and personal responsibility? I know my role within my job, but everybody in the community has personal responsibility for standing up and taking action, not letting things happen and speaking up. And for youths, there's so much that's come through in the last 10 years to protect you, to look after you when you're potentially you get into trouble, to guide you, to support you. But you all, each as individuals, have the capacity to be able to help to a positive ripple effect by showing good behaviour, getting involved in things. As neighbourhood policing, we find sometimes you can go out with a diversionary project, an idea, let's get this programme started up to move children away. And I'm not saying anybody in this room would fit into it, but kids that are getting into trouble. And if they were perceived to be better role models around them in their own community, ideally, that let's get on board, let's actually come together, produce something that's really positive, and steer people away from making bad choices. And you might just see that on a smaller level with your own community of friends. So you could just use your own moral compass to be able to guide them in a positive way.
Brian, two very positive notes to finish on. Can you say thank you to Gabrielle, to Judy and to Johnny? Thank you very much.